Question number 8, Phil Twyford.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Building and Housing. Does he stand by his statement in relation to data showing that 1,694 houses were sold into foreign ownership, excluding any bought by trusts or companies, that, and I quote, the numbers are so small, unquote?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Yes, particularly compared to the member's 40% buyer claims based on racial profiling of people with Chinese-sounding names.
Apologise. Supplementary.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Why should any offshore speculators be allowed to buy New Zealand homes?
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the member continuously uses the word speculators. My challenge to him is to go to any auction and to differentiate between those New Zealanders that are genuinely wanting to invest and those that pretend they're speculators.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. That was a very, very straight question, and he completely failed to address it.
No, he didn't. The member asked why should any overseas speculator be allowed to buy, and the member said the difficulty is in defining who is buying at a particular auction, etc. That addresses the question. Maybe not to the satisfaction of the member, but it certainly addresses the question that was asked.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
How many sales to foreign speculators does he think would represent a large enough problem to warrant action?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
I draw the member's attention to the data during the first 6 months of properties that were sold. Give me a chance, mate. In respect of the sales data, is that there were 1,692 buyers from overseas tax residents, and there were 1,695 sellers. There was a net reduction of 3 in terms of the number of properties owned in New Zealand by persons that were tax residents overseas. That doesn't sound to me like a crisis.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is he aware that when the exceptions the government used to manipulate the figures are removed, the raw data actually shows that 8.8% or 15,905 properties are being sold to offshore speculators a year? And does he think that that is too small?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
No, the member's claims are about as accurate as those on Chinese-sounding names. We have 100% data on every one of the transactions over that 6-month period, of which were purchased and settled within that 6 months. We have tax residency status for every single one of those. The number is 2.5%, and that includes New Zealand residents and citizens who are tax residents overseas but bought properties in New Zealand.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Phil Twyford.
I seek leave to table calculations from my office showing that the actual number of offshore buyers is nearly $16,000 a year, based on that minister's data.
Point of order.
I need to deal with this one first. I'm certainly not putting the leave. I read out a particular speaker's ruling only about 10 minutes ago. I was hoping the member might have heard it. But if it's information that's prepared by parliamentary by the research units or by your office, it's not authentic enough to table to be of informative information to the member. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Why did he exclude businesses and trusts from the calculation of foreign buyers in the market in the time period that was used?
Mr. Speaker,
the Honourable Dr.
member
Nick Smith.
is incorrect. The tax residency status applies to every single transaction. If the property is owned by a trust, if the company is owned by a company, if it's owned by an individual, the tax residency status is noted. It's actually quite cautious. A number of property transactions involve a number of companies. or a number of trusts, or a number of individuals, if any one of those are overseas tax registered, the transaction is listed as overseas tax resident.
That's right.
Question number 9.